Nimbility is the intersection of resilience and innovation. And it's the ability to face disruptions or chaos and thrive. Every large organization that's been very successful but has failed did so because of a lack of nimbility. They were unable to face the new demands and the new consequences and the new requirements of what was going on in the marketplace.
I met today's guest a few weeks ago, and after visiting with him for just a few minutes, I knew that you guys had to meet him too. He has come out with 2 new books at the same time, he and his co-author, and they really challenge us to think through the status quo personally and within our organization, and what's working, what's not working. And let's look at how we can do things differently with more innovation and strategy. And I love a good strategic approach. So I am excited for you to hear this conversation with Mark Smith. He has worked for years, as he'll share, with bringing billions of dollars into disruptive technology. So he really understands the ins and outs of organizations and has worked with many C-suite leaders who are working to transform their business. And he has so much nonprofit knowledge as well from working with organizations, both nonprofits and businesses. And he has just a really interesting perspective that he can bring both sides to the table. And he has 2 new books called The Nimble C-Suite and The Nimble Company, which he'll talk about a little bit more. And he and his co-founder are really dedicated to helping leaders embrace the idea of nimbility. And he brings some broad leadership perspective, business models, and also just some really strong coaching skills that are super practical and actionable, and really challenges us to think in a transformational mindset to improve and just innovate and make something different that really appeals and makes a difference in the world. And that's what we're all about, right? And that's why we're here, so that we can make a difference on our missions. So I hope you enjoy this interview with Mark Smith. Mark, welcome. I am excited to talk with you. Before we start, tell us a random fact about yourself.
A random fact: when I was in college, I used to climb the radio tower at the radio station to change the light bulbs, and one time actually do maintenance on the antenna. And part of the reason why is the chief engineer for the radio station was so obese, he couldn't do it. And so they asked if I would do it. And when they told me how much they would pay me for it, which was a king's ransom back in those days, I said yes. So I am a tower climber as a profession at one point in my career.
Okay, interesting. So I guess you're not really afraid of heights.
Oh, no.
Or you got over it.
I'm quite afraid of heights. But for the amount of money they paid me, I figured out how to trick myself into being okay that far off the ground.
Okay, interesting. This could turn into a mind tricking lesson.
Oh, it was a mind trick, but don't get me wrong. It was safe. I was secured to the tower at every point. I wasn't free climbing.
Sure, but still, the thought of being that far off the ground.
Yeah. Actually, it wasn't the fact that it was off the ground. We're okay at 42,000 feet in airplanes.
Sure.
It's the thought of falling.
Right, and making contact with the ground.
Yeah, that would have ended badly.
Yeah, well, obviously you made it through and lived to tell this tale, and here you are with that on your resume.
Well, I don't know if it's on my resume, but it just, that was back in my radio days.
Yeah, that's fun. Well, tell us a little bit about your days. And I know you have a lot of interesting experience, and I want to dig into that today, but give us a little sneak peek.
Let's do this quickly so that's in context for your listener. I'm a business growth strategist. I help executives and organizations plot the path to the future. And what that means is we look at every aspect that's required to grow the business: mindset, skill set, habit set, marketplace, sales, marketing, customer service, product development. And we look at all those elements to figure out, okay, what's the best way to increment the growth of the organization? And I've done that over the past 3.5 decades, working primarily in the high tech world because they always had lots of money to spend, and bringing to market new ideas that had not been presented to the market before. And so we call those disruptive products. Mm-hmm. And so I've helped literally bring billions and billions of dollars to market with companies like Hewlett Packard and IBM and Microsoft and Oracle and NetApp. And I learned a heck of a lot along the way. How do you communicate ideas that people have never thought before? That's one of the things that disruptive products bring to you is I've never thought about that. Heck, I don't know if I could use that. That doesn't make any sense to me. And then all of a sudden, you're using it all the time. Probably the best example of a disruptive product are these things, smartphones. And if 12 years ago I told you that, hey, I've got a telephone for you, but there's no buttons. There's no dials, there's no wires. And you go, what are you talking about? Mm-hmm. And now, there is just a couple of buttons on this thing. There's 3 buttons on this. What?
And we have access to a whole computer and a world of information on it.
Exactly. So how does this relate to nonprofits? Well, most nonprofits are bringing new ideas to the world. New ways of doing things, new ways of up-leveling humanity, new ways of up-leveling their constituents. And how do you message that to those organizations? So that's one of the ways that we can apply this idea. The second thing is that I understand how business works because I've worked with all these businesses for many, many years and understand how do we grow them. And those resulted in the 2 new books that are shown on my screen, which is The Nimble C-Suite and The Nimble Company. And today, I think what we want to do is talk about how do we bring the concept of nimbility to nonprofit organizations so that they can better accomplish their mission.
Agreed. And that's exactly why I wanted you to talk to the audience today, because I knew you would be a wealth of information and strategic thinking and pushing us to think outside the box, which I like to do, and challenge us to think creatively. And that sometimes we get in a rut and forget, like, it's okay to be creative and to really dig into new ideas and disrupt the status quo, like you say. So let's dig in.
All right, let's go.
Well, I've been reading your first book, as I mentioned, and
thank you.
Would really like for you to dig in and kind of set the stage with the different types of economy and the transformation that we're seeing, and just give us that context first of all.
Yeah, I think the reason why we're going to talk about that is because this is one of 2 books that I released this year with my co-author Dr. David Gruder. And a lot of people say, "What do you release 2 books at a time?" Yeah, we're insane.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? And this is one of many books that I've written. So it's just fun to do this. But the reason why we're talking about it is the Nimble C-Suite, and the concept of nimbility is the intersection of innovation and resilience. And we have to have both if we're going to be disruptive and allow this to happen. So it's how to align the diverse strengths of your executive team to predictably deliver extraordinary outcomes in a transformational economy. So from a context standpoint, we're going to talk about the economies to put the rest of this work into context. So that's why, just so that you understand, listener, we're really not jumping around.
Right. And I think what you're saying, now is the time, as we've talked before, this is the time for this kind of message, for this kind of framework. People are needing to reshift and find our footing again after the last few years of ups and downs. So this will help provide some encouragement and strategies to move forward.
Absolutely. I think context is the most important aspect to this. And yes, over the past 3 years, we have been traumatized as a world. Mm-hmm. And our core concerns have all been wounded with abandonment and separation and all of those things. It's been really hard, especially for people that don't have tools to deal with those things. Mm-hmm. And so we have to bring healing. One of the things that I've noticed is people are well, we all Zoom these days. We rarely phone. We all Zoom.
Right.
But the problem with Zoom is it requires agreement to a time and a place. And I've decided to stop that. I mean, yes, you and I are having this conversation because we've agreed to have it, and just pick up the phone and dial.
It's funny
And
that seems old fashioned now, but it's still effective.
people are picking up. People are having
Sure.
conversations. They're saying, I was just thinking about you. And the conversation is along the lines of, well, me too. Maybe that's why we're talking. But
Mm-hmm.
the point is that reconnection as we come out of the insanity of the past 1,000 days is so critical.
Right.
And to put into context, that has accelerated the move to the transformational economy. And I don't think we would have moved into that as quickly if we didn't have the insanity of the past 1,000 days.
Right. It's kind of forced us into this new avenue, and we're trying to figure out what it is and navigate this. And so,
Well,
yeah, explain to us what you mean by that.
indeed. In fact, I think it not just forced, but also pulled us into
Right.
that.
Right.
So,
Ready or not.
so the basic idea, and I'm going to refer to the cheat sheet of my book here.
Sure.
The idea is that a value proposition and sales method works with each economic wave. An economic wave is, what is it in the economy that is generating the most value and therefore the most revenue? And as a nonprofit, you want to be on the peak of that value curve. Even though you're not looking for revenue, you are looking to provide services that map to what people have decided is important in this moment. And we started when we were tribes in the subsistence economy. And that is, we would just get enough to meet our needs and live. And the goal was, I'm alive, I'm living. And there are still parts of the planet that operate in a subsistence economy. If you go to Bali, it's a subsistence economy. You've got the house in back, the shop in front. That's a subsistence type of economy. And then as tribes began to settle, we moved to the commodity economy, where we would grow crops, or we would mine minerals, or we would cut down wood. And then people would buy and trade those commodities. And the goal was, I'm productive. So beyond subsistence to, I'm productive and I can create more than I can consume. Therefore, that was the economy we focused on. And of course, that economy still exists. It just isn't the leading part of the economy. But if we rewind the clock 100 years, half the population was involved in making food. Now it's less than 1%. Wow. Right? It's a big difference in the shift in the economy.
Mm-hmm.
And then we moved into the product economy, and that really began with the Industrial Revolution, where we would start to create products with machines. And this is where people started to buy labor savings. So instead of making your own clothing, you would buy clothing that was already made. Instead of weaving your own cloth, you would buy cloth that was already woven. And the goal was, I'm an efficient person. And then this is where really we started to have fairly massive changes in how people lived, where they could actually afford things because they could generate value beyond what they could in the past. And so people would earn wages, and we moved into, the environment of 100 years ago. Then the service economy emerged after the Second World War, when two-earner families needed to buy time. So we would buy services that we normally would have done on our own back in the farming days. We would buy those services, whether it was repairs or cleaning or food preparation or professional services or something like that. I mean, we moved from doing our own taxes to having an accountant do our taxes. There's a good example of that. And then we moved to the experience economy, and this really happened in the 90s. And this is where people started choosing memorable experiences, not just service, but memorable service. And this is when social media really started coming into play. Netflix and Google and Yelp and going to Las Vegas are all experience economy examples. And the goal is to get to the point where I'm an interesting person. And you can see how the ascension has been climbing up. So people go to Las Vegas to come home with stories, because you can gamble anywhere in the United States now. Doesn't really matter anymore. Gambling's not the thing, but it's going there and seeing the shows that are impossible to produce unless you have millions of people show up every year and buy tickets for them. There's no way to reproduce those kind of shows outside of Vegas.
To recreate that experience.
That's exactly right. So you come and get stories that nobody else can tell, and you go home, and I'm an interesting person. And of course, we do that on social media. People get on social media and they illustrate that they're an important person because of all of the important things they're doing, blah, blah, blah. But I think this is actually one of the things that nonprofits have missed, is bringing the experience, the unique experience, the desirable experience to what they drive. And they operate more of in a service economy kind of mode, which is long gone as far as being a peak desire, and instead bring the experience, whether it's to the contributors or the members or those that are consuming their services. You have to bring an entertaining or experience element to this to make it sticky and interesting. Because quite frankly, nonprofits are competing with Netflix.
Unfortunately, true.
It's not unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
It's not unfortunate. I demand that you take that back.
Okay, I'll take it back.
All right.
Why so?
Well, the reason why is because once you understand that, then you can compete with Netflix.
Okay.
But if you don't know that you're competing with Netflix, how do you know what to do to become as interesting or as exciting or as engaging as what Netflix does?
Mm-hmm. So how do you compete with that?
Well, it's easy. It's that you bring yourself to the next level of this, the next transformation. Well done.
Setting you right up there.
Well, you did. Thank you very much. You moved to the transformation. You do. Thank you. You moved to the transformational economy, where people start, instead of buying memorable, start buying meaningful
mm-hmm.
and authentic, and making themselves a better person. And in the transformational economy, what people purchase is make it better, make me better, make us better.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know how to do that, if you can figure out how to do that, then you can compete with Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
Because it takes them beyond just, I'm an interesting person and I binged watched this show. Yeah, put that on your resume.
Right.
Put that on your tombstone.
Or give that something to talk about at a dinner or a luncheon, that you binged Netflix versus giving back to this meaningful cause that's helping build something in the community.
That's right. And I guarantee you, if you're having lunch with your friend and they ask the question, so what's lighting you up these days? Talking about how you're involved in a nonprofit to make it better, make us better, make the community better is going to be way more interesting than, I just finished binge watching the latest Netflix. There's no competition.
Right. And it sparks interest in something bigger, something better in that.
That's exactly right. And so the goal is in that particular place is, with transformational economy, is I'm a better person.
Mm-hmm. So appealing to the core of what we want to be or do or become, as opposed to just a existence.
That's exactly right. And so we're moving away from more narcissistic to more altruistic. How lovely is that?
It's a relief, but also how do we balance that out then?
Go ahead.
With the education, the opportunities, the understanding of
you bring the transformational view set, the mindset, the transformational lens to those things. We can transform. We can make anything better. We can make education better. We can make services better. We can make donating better. We can make grant writing better. All of those things can be improved by applying the transformational concept of make it better, make me better, make us better. And by the way, we didn't make that stuff up. That came from original research done by one of the members of the Nobility Works, which I'm part of. And so this is real data. This is what people are craving today. Mm-hmm. It's what they're willing to pay for today. And the rapidly growing companies are providing this transformation. So we expect for the transformational economy to be economy to be as disruptive as any of the other economies, because it means that we have to do things different. The rules change when we have a transformational economy.
Tell us, you've used the word nimbility several times, and I liked how you explained that in your book. Tell us what you mean by that.
Yes, nimbility is the intersection of resilience and innovation. And it's the ability to face disruptions or chaos and thrive.
Which we're in the middle of right now. So that's definitely highly relevant.
And it's not going to slow down.
Right.
The amount of chaos and disruption has just increased exponentially, as has technology. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that we have to become nimble in our mindset, in our skill set, in our habit set, if we're going to make it through here. And every large organization that's been very successful but has failed did so because of a lack of nimbility. They were unable to face the new demands and the new consequences and the new requirements of what was going on in the marketplace. And of course, when you face chaos, and chaos is really simply this: I can't see the pattern. I don't see a pattern here. Versus if you're facing something that's known, oh, I see the pattern, I know what to do. In chaos, I don't see the pattern, so I don't know what to do. And that's the difference.
And sometimes just that definition helps. Once we've defined it, then we can figure out what to do. But initially, it's overwhelming and we don't even know how to define it.
That's right. So in chaos, of course, the idea is let's pick one thing that we do know. Let's pick the one thing that we do recognize, and then we walk ourselves into the world of chaos as we identify the pattern. And this really comes from my engineering background, where when you face an unknown problem, the first thing you start with is you write down everything you do know.
Mm-hmm. Very logical. That's very tangible and practical. Like we can all do that.
That's exactly right. And it also brings us some hope.
Right.
That it's not as far gone. It's not as chaotic as we thought.
Mm-hmm. And I like to point out, like, even if it seems too simple or silly, like if you're looking back at your experience and, you climbed water tower or radio towers and changed light bulbs, that's a unique, interesting thing. It's still a fun conversation piece. So even in a nonprofit, when you're writing down things, like you said, nothing is too small or too silly. Take that inventory because you don't know what might connect those dots.
Well, I like where you're going there, because small and silly are judgments.
True. And that's where it may feel like it, but dump it out anyway.
Yes.
Because it might be useful.
Yes, because you might be able to show somebody who doesn't think it's small and silly, and all of a sudden they can connect dots that if you call them small and silly and disregard them through that judgment, that you're missing.
Exactly.
And so sometimes by calling things small and silly, we create blind spots.
Right.
Okay. We always create blind spots when we create judgments.
Right. And that's a tough one to uncover, whether it's ourselves or a board and leadership. That's tough to crack the code on those sometimes.
Indeed. In fact, in the book, The Nimble Company, which is the companion volume, we go into depth into blind spots. There's really there's three reasons why a well-meaning executive fails. And those are, they have blind spots. They don't know what they don't know. And the second reason is they have misunderstandings. What they used to know isn't true anymore, or it's true, but not useful, or it's true, but not applicable in this context.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Oh boy, have I been fried by that one? Oh, I've got the answer. Ooh, I didn't have the context.
Yeah.
And then the third reason why they fail, even though they're well-meaning, is withholds. Somebody in the organization doesn't give them the information they need. Somebody is keeping information, and it could be well-meaning. Oh, I don't want to bother the boss with this. Or it could be political. Oh, I'm going to control this information flow. Mm-hmm. And those are the three reasons why a well-meaning leader might fail. That's it. Blind spots, misunderstandings, and withholds. And one of the things that we need to do culturally is excise those three. And we talk about how to do that in the Nimble Company. We discuss it in the Nimble C-Suite too, but we go into depth in the Nimble Company on how to do that. And so those things increase our nimbility, because in chaos, all of a sudden we invoke blind spots. We actually create them. And we do that because we start to ignore or rationalize red flags.
They become normal and accepted, and you get used to them. And
yes. And what we don't know is there's a freight train coming down the track.
Or maybe we hope it'll stop before it gets to us.
Yeah. Keep that hope going. Keep it going. But a disruption is headed your way. So yes, indeed, those blind spots are killers for organizations. And you know, I think that nonprofits have an inordinate amount of these three issues, more than most organizations.
I would agree with that.
And part of it is just because of the lens, the mindset that people work within an organization. Oh, this is a nonprofit, that doesn't really matter. Oops.
Right. Or they come in not knowing anything about nonprofits and bringing only business skills as opposed to learning how nonprofits operate, or not bringing enough business skills to the equation to operate it well.
Yes, that's exactly right. As you and I well know, a nonprofit is a tax status, not a business plan.
Yes, exactly. And much to many people's surprise.
Yes, exactly. Especially those that want to launch a nonprofit but have no money.
Right.
Well, you have to run it like a business.
You mean you can't just get a grant for that?
Wouldn't that be nice?
I'm being snarky.
It's good though, but grants are given away because the grantor has a business rationale in mind.
Right. And they're looking for a solid investment.
That's exactly right. The only thing is we just don't have to give the money back, but they're looking for a return.
Right.
An energetic term, a psychic return, or even some sort of monetary return that will be indirect.
Right. Some kind of impact. Yep.
That's exactly right, on that investment. And
you're recapping my whole TEDx talk right there.
Wow. I must have watched it.
Maybe.
Oh, goodness. So, we were talking about the transformational economy and how you have identified by reading the book, and your area of expertise in the worlds of nonprofits is that nonprofits really have to embrace this concept of being transformational. They have to embrace the concept of being nimble, bring the innovation into the world where it appears to be chaotic. And then we add the next piece, which is bringing resilience. And the idea behind having resilience is that a lot of times innovation fails. It's an iterative cycle as we get to the place where innovation actually works. And so you have to have the resources. If you can't bounce back. And those resources are going to be mental, they're going to be emotional, they're going to be financial, they're going to be political. You have to have room to make mistakes if you're going to be resilient. You have to celebrate the fact that, that didn't work. What did we learn? All right, it's all good. We don't fire people for experimenting. We fire people for sitting on their hands.
Right, for slowing things down and holding it back.
That's it. So there's a cultural element to being resilient that is important to consider. But the biggest concept here is that, you go into an innovative situation with the resources to fail, not necessarily the expectation to fail. That's dumb. But the resources to fail and do it again. And the mindset of learning, of failing forward.
Right. And not being afraid of failing. Like, it'll be okay. We'll figure it out. We'll keep going and learn from that.
Exactly. And you take a look at any child, who's 2-3 years old, who's learning how to walk, learning how to talk, learning how to manipulate their environment. And it is constant failure. absolutely constant failure. And yet they don't stop. They keep going. And as parents, we encourage them to keep going.
Right. So somewhere along the way, it shifts.
That's exactly right. And the place where it starts to shift is where we stop celebrating their innovations and start limiting their innovations. Mm-hmm. It's that time when we have a child where we go from, oh, yay, that's so wonderful, I love your new word, yay, you ran across, to where they grab a crayon and start drawing on the wall. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you're even grimacing doing that.
Yeah, I'm picturing myself and my own kids, and
history. Yes, the history's there, and all of a sudden the innovation. What?
Cross that boundary.
What? And they don't even know what the boundary is.
Right.
The boundary is unknown because we've told them that innovation is great until we decide that we need to, and it really freaks a child out. Mm-hmm. I thought I was unstoppable. I thought that I was just absolutely master of my world. And then all of a sudden you're telling me I'm not? What?
So then in a nonprofit, how can we shift that back around within a good, healthy direction to become more innovative again?
All right. So we have
afraid of that.
So the thing is, we have to create boundaries that are acceptable behavior. Mm-hmm. And behaving is something that's required for us to operate in a civil way. And my point is really with that story is that we start off with nothing but innovation. And then along the way, our innovation gets squelched and we don't know why. And so we become afraid of innovating because of punishment. And that gets built into us at a very young age. And so as we mature, we have to learn how to remove those barriers of fear of punishment for innovation. And the way that we can do that in an organization is to make it okay to innovate. Now, you do those through initiatives. All right, we need to implement change in how we deliver our services. How do we innovate that? And we're going to try some stuff, and odds are it probably won't work out very well, but we're going to learn from that and we're going to fail forward. And how can we do better? How can we compete for those grants if we're not at least bringing something new to the table? Otherwise, we might as well photocopy a grant from 25 years ago and submit it. I don't think that's going to fly, right. But that's mostly what people are doing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, just bringing that into the different contexts of the work. Maybe it's with the program or with trying out a different grant or understanding that we're not going to get all of these. And that's part of the process, but we can get better and better every time.
Well, think about it this way. Grant writing is a sales process. Mm-hmm. Of course, you thought about it that way.
Right.
It's a sales process. And if you haven't done your research, you'll have no idea how to make your pitch, your sales pitch.
Mm-hmm. Any kind of fundraising it's really a type of sales.
All fundraising is a sales activity.
But even more deeply, when it's done well, it's a relationship building activity.
Well, that's what
leads to sales.
Well, that would be marketing.
True.
The definition of marketing in my world is every activity that leads to a conversation or interaction. Mm-hmm. And what we do with marketing is we earn the right to educate them on what we do. And then once we have earned that right to educate them on what we do and how that fits into their world and brings value to them, then we have earned the right to sell, which is the conversation about how we create a transaction that values both parties or both parties' value. Mm-hmm. And then once we've done that, then we've earned the right to transact. And it's a sequence. We have to go through that sequence, at least initially, to make things happen.
And build trust along the way.
Well, of course. And with the trust is what keeps it going. Mm-hmm. Because the moment that we do a trust buster, it's interrupted and they're gone. And they are irretrievable.
Right. Yeah.
And of course, trust comes from authenticity and integrity. Mm-hmm. And if you can be natural, if you can be yourself, and if you can do what you say you're going to do, then the trust happens through the interactions.
And those take time.
It does.
It can't happen overnight. It takes time to build that trust and to build that long-term relationship and that longevity.
Absolutely true. Consistency is a major factor to trust. If you're acting different every time you have a conversation with them or every time they interact with your website, of course, that insanity is frequent in nonprofits where there is a lack of consistency across the marketing messages. It's schizophrenic.
Right. It can be, unfortunately.
Yeah. And that's that. Yes.
Well, I think that speaks to sometimes living on the bare bones budget of, oh, we've got a volunteer for this or an intern for that or somebody else helping with that. And then it looks pieced together instead of having that consistency. That's
right. And that lack of consistency damages trust.
Right. Right. Because I think we underrate that.
Yeah, you do. We do.
Yeah.
You do. All of us do.
We all do.
We all underrate that lack of consistency. Yet our favorite brands have an extraordinary level of consistency against every touch point. Mm-hmm. And the magical word these days is omni-channel, where we reach people through lots of different ways: social media, direct email, voicemail, conversations, come visit our location. All those are they consider omni-channel because there's different channels to reach out to people. And if that omni-channel isn't consistent across the board, it's a complete waste because people don't recognize that it's you, no matter what channel they use to find you.
Right. No matter where they land. Mm-hmm. Given this idea of the transformational economy, we've been talking about it in the nonprofit organizational context, but if individuals are shifting this way as well, what do you recommend as the best way for nonprofits to speak to that desire or that newer drive in people? How can they connect with that as an organization?
Well, I think that it starts with talking to and interviewing those who have been through your programs, those who you have served well, and also your benefactors. And nonprofits have multiple audiences that require different marketing messages.
Right.
And you can't treat everybody the same because those that consume you have a different trigger for consumption and a different outcome of consumption of your services than those who fund you, no matter if it's individuals or if it's a grant type of scenario. And so start off by talking to people that have been with you for a while and ask them questions such as, how have we made a difference in your life? How are you better because of the work we did together? What would have it been like if you hadn't had the experience you had with us? Where would you be today? And so what you want to do is tease out the story of the transformations that you have already affected in your very best constituents. Mm-hmm. Now you've got a story to tell to illustrate to others what they can expect. We don't sell transformation through traditional features, advantages, and benefits.
Right.
We can't do that.
The facts and figures.
That's not how it works. And that harkens back to the old product and service economies. And while we were getting tastes of the stories in the experience economy, you still had that enough product underlying knowledge where people would talk about features, advantages, and benefits. Mm-hmm. That just doesn't work because you can't sell a product with features, advantages, and benefits that a person will not understand until they have been through the experience.
And connecting it to that illustration that's relatable and a clear, powerful visual.
Indeed. So the way that we do that, though, is by telling a story of somebody who has been through the transformation. Mm-hmm. And we talk about it as before experience as much as is relevant to a listener or somebody that's not aware of it. And then after, you have to tell it as a hero's journey.
Right. And sometimes that's the donor themselves of how
I would
it's helped the
expect so.
donor. Right.
I would do it for a donor. I would do it for a recipient.
Mm-hmm.
I would do it for somebody who's granted us in the past,
Mm-hmm.
somebody who's endowed us in the past. I would ask them those questions so that I had the right transformational story to share with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that encourages others too when they hear the story.
Yes, because that's what makes it compelling.
Mm-hmm.
Is if they have a shred of before in their life, they immediately get hooked in and they want to hear the story and they want to find out how it turns out.
Right. And then they want to become a part of it.
That's right. And they're going, oh, maybe that'll work for me.
One thing I would like to dig into was this idea you mentioned about dysfunctional inertia.
Ah, yes.
Because I see this sometimes in organizations and also in people, like even the grant writers that come to me for help as individuals. They're just stuck or on a track that is just not working and not feeling right. So dig into that concept.
In the book, we call it paradigm attachment disorder. Oh, I love big multi-syllable words because I charge by the syllable.
Oh, perfect. We'll just rack up a huge bill here.
That's exactly right. Paradigm attachment disorder is simply believing that what you've done in the past is going to work in the future.
I hear a lot of board members entrenched in this, and it's really hard to crack.
Of course. And
that concrete.
It actually gets into a situation where those board members do not have a shred of innovation in their head.
It's unfortunate.
Innovation threatens them. Mm-hmm. And so what we look at is we have this balance that we have to bring into bear. We have to bring stability, the steward. Those are the people that don't want to change. But we also have to bring those who are willing to create change, invoke change, invite change, discover change. And the balance is who runs the show. If it's all the stewardship and we can't change, then you're on a downward slide, which will accelerate more rapidly as time progresses. And on the other hand, if you're all over here where you're doing nothing but change, it's chaotic. Mm-hmm. And you keep changing your messaging, you keep changing your offering, you keep changing, and people have no idea. They're all confused.
And it goes back to that lack of stability that you mentioned earlier.
That's exactly right. We're not stable. So what we have to do is we have to balance these two opposing forces. Mm-hmm. Because we have to have some stability. Otherwise, we don't have resilience.
Right.
And we have to have change. Otherwise, we don't have innovation.
Right. Right. So finding that mix.
Finding that mix and making sure you don't have one over-energized over the other. Right. is the job, the role of the executive director. Mm-hmm. And yes, you have a brilliant idea.
I'm just curious, your thoughts. The level of balance for each of those may shift in different seasons and different scenarios of what's happening, what they're going through. They may need more of one or the other for a specific time.
Yes, and that's where the executive director's wisdom and sagacity comes into play, is understanding it's not the dial gets set to 50% of each.
Right. Knowing when to turn each dial a little bit more or less.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, if you're on your growth path and you're meeting your goals, then leave the dial where it is. Mm-hmm. And yet if your forward-looking flag says, I predict that we're going to have a downturn, then we need to turn up the innovation a little bit while we still have plenty of stability. Right? Because if you run out of stability, you don't have any resources for innovation.
Right.
So in a lot of organizations, what happens is they crash and burn, and then they bring in new blood. Oh, we need to bring in new blood. Well, you didn't have to go that far. Right. You didn't have to wait that long.
Mm-hmm. Or change everything all at once. Sometimes we just need to change one or two at a time, see how that goes, let it stabilize, then change something else, let it stabilize instead of everything.
Well, if we change everything, we might as well start from scratch.
Yeah.
Might as well blow it up and open a new organization.
Right.
Because then there's no expectations.
And you don't have the chaos. You can do it in a more organized, structured way.
Right. Because people come in and go, what's this? This is new. And then you can lay out the plan and they go, oh, okay, I'll be a part of that. Or no, this is not going to work for me. So if your plan is to change everything, just nuke it and start all over again. It's going to save you an enormous amount of effort and time. And if you get to that point anyway, you probably don't have any resources left.
Right. I like the boxes that you have where you compare the different elements of both those sides to keep it in balance, and you show. And sometimes we don't need to be so entrenched in more of that scarcity. We need to be more of the open, encouraging, exciting, or forward thinking. But we do need the mix of the stability and the innovation, like you said.
Absolutely. We got to have that stability, as well as we add a second dimension to this, which is do versus be. Mm-hmm. And we have to recognize that doing is important. But it's also important for us to take time to think about what it is that we're doing. And actions for action's sake doesn't mean that it's good action.
Right.
And this is where contemplation comes into play. And this is where you put together think tanks that say, I wonder what would happen if we did this. But we can't over-energize either of those.
Yes, and I think often the be part of that gets overlooked or swept aside because they're wearing so many hats and so busy and so much to do that they feel like they don't have time to be. When sometimes that's the most important piece that's missing, is taking that time to think and collaborate and just brainstorm, not for a specific meeting or purpose, but just for the purpose of connecting. And that's when the good ideas start to stir up. So sometimes that is a tough balance, but it's a good reminder to deliberately stop and do both.
Yes, well, it's only tough because it's not habitual.
Right.
And it's only tough because it hasn't typically been done. And it's only tough because corporations have ignored B with a few exceptions, a few obvious exceptions. Mm-hmm. And so bringing the B element to it is part of how we operate in a transformational environment. Because in a transformational world, people are shifting from being human doings into human beings.
Right.
It's part of that transformation. So it has to be part of your organizational thought process. We transform because we are better, and we can't are better by just doing. That only works in the gym.
Right. But even to prepare to go to the gym, you've got to be in the right mindset and put the shoes on and decide, I'm going to go today. I'm not going to skip it.
That's right, because you've got both ends, which is skip it or go there and overdo it.
Mm-hmm. And right? Regret it later.
Right. And it's those are your two extremes. And what we got to do is go to the gym somewhere in the middle.
Right. Consistently and reasonably.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's a good explanation, good metaphor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's relatable. And sometimes we just need a completely different metaphor.
Yep.
Something outside.
That's it.
So what would you say for a nonprofit who say is just kind of stuck in some of these paradigms, like you've mentioned, like we talked about with the inertia and some dysfunction? Where should they start with untangling some of this and with trying to reset some of the thought processes around it?
This should be no surprise to you. You start with your vision and you revisit your mission. Mm-hmm. Are you aligned with those things? Or do they need to be reworked? because the vision is what we intend to manifest with our organization, and the mission is what we are currently doing to manifest that in our organization. And a lot of times, if there is lots of chaos, it's because we've gotten off beam. We're not on mission. We're not on vision. And so therefore, it's very easy for chaos to get implemented because people are well-meaningly doing what they think is the right thing, but it's not contributing to what the organization has in mind. Mm-hmm. So we have to come back to realigning to our North Star, our North Pole, and find out, are we actually doing what we say we're going to do? Or do we need to change it? That's acceptable. You get to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the key is figuring out, what do we want that to look like? And does that still serve our community?
Exactly.
Because that's really the end goal, is serving well whatever your population is and whatever your mission is. So is it still serving them well? Is it what they need? Or do we need to shift to meet the needs better?
Absolutely. Then once you have that in place, then you can start to untangle the threads of, no, that's not contributing. That could contribute more if we tune our approach. Yes, that is contributing to where we are going. Yes, those are donors that are still donating for our mission. These are donors that see our mission has shifted and they're saying, no, we're not going to support that anymore. You can start to take apart the situation and then apply sequence intelligence to what requires our attention first. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, in all situations, you've got to start with, what is it we're trying to do, and why are we trying to do it, and are we on target? That's always the right answer. Because if we get into tactical fixing things, without that, then we're fixing the wrong problem.
Mm-hmm. Do we even know what the problem is and why we're trying to fix it?
That's exactly right. We may be making a judgment about what's causing the problem when we have no idea actually what we're trying to accomplish. What's the problem we're trying to solve?
Right.
Right on.
Right. Yeah. Having that core and having the whole team understand that. Sometimes I think operations maybe get in these small groups, or certain people are in the know and they either deliberately or not leave other people out of that vision and that focus. And then they're kind of out of the loop and everyone's working at different purposes in different directions. And
that's the problem with culture drift and withholds, which you described as that scenario. Those are the root causes for what you just described. And what we have to do is fix the culture shift so the withholding stops. So withholds is a culture problem.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say, where would you start with a culture problem?
I would start with, what is our defined culture? Do we have a defined culture? Is everybody agreeing to abide by our defined culture? And, as Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And there's a great example of that just in what we're bringing up here, where the culture where withholds are allowed is going to destroy the strategy. Mm-hmm. So we have to go back and fix this fact that we have a closed culture. We have topics we don't talk about. We have topics that we don't share. And so therefore we create this withhold scenario that has all kinds of unintended second and third order effects. Mm-hmm. Do
you think the reverse could ever be true, where maybe they overshare and then it just stirs up angst and more, I guess, dissension within the organization by oversharing?
So oversharing is an interesting challenge because one of my clients that I worked with, I do CEO coaching. I help them figure out how to grow their businesses. And one client I was working with had that belief, absolutely well-meaning, one of the finest people on the planet. I trust him with my wallet. And I don't know what he'd do with my wallet, but I would trust him with it. And he said, I want a transparent organization. And I said, you don't want to do that. What you want is the right level of information for the people that you're speaking to. And for example, the people on the front line will be freaked out by your 5-year plan.
True.
Because they have no idea how to get to your big goal.
And they're not in the same place you are.
No, they're not in the same place in terms of perspective, in terms of experience, in terms of knowledge, in terms of resources. And they're just growing up. Mm-hmm. We don't feed a baby steak or offer them a glass of Cabernet.
Right.
We don't do that. So it's that level of where are they? That's the information we feed them, and we be completely transparent at that level of knowledge that they can digest and use. Doesn't mean we're keeping secrets. It means that they earn the right to larger and larger pieces of the vision. Mm-hmm. People at the front line need small pieces of the vision, close in, something that they can deal with, something that they know how to take care of in the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 5 months. Mm-hmm. And versus the people at the top are looking 3 to 5 years out.
Like you were saying earlier, with building over time, that credibility, the integrity, the consistency, see who is doing that and who can handle more and more responsibility and steward it well.
Indeed. Well, and if you're a forward-thinking executive of a nonprofit, your vision for the future will scare your frontline people.
Right. It will. And in a way, it should.
It should. It should if that's the way. It should make you really excited and should scare the living daylights out of everybody else in your organization.
Right.
How are we ever going to do that? How are we ever going to fund that? How are we going to implement that? Of course, because you'll figure that stuff out.
Right.
And they have to have it figured out before they see it as a possibility. And that's the difference between a tactical thinker, I've got to figure this out before I can do it, and a strategic thinker, which is, I'm going to do this, now I'll go figure it out.
Right.
You see, the order is slightly reversed. And for a lot of people who's a tactical thinker, moving to that reverse of, I'm going to imagine it and then I'll go figure it out is inconceivable, because it creates too much mental chaos.
Right. They're
too
not
much
ready
uncertainty
to take that leap. That's a big leap when you're not there yet.
Yes. Interestingly, I had a conversation with an extraordinarily innovative gentleman today who I've known for decades, and I love him dearly, and I love his mind. I love how he thinks. He's extremely innovative. And he shared with me that it's only been in the past year that he's been able to make the mental shift to think strategically, because he was trained and rewarded for tactical thinking.
Mm-hmm. And that's how we're taught in school.
Absolutely.
You follow the steps, you follow the rules, you go in order. We're not taught to jump and then figure it out on our way back.
No. And I say this with the greatest level of respect. Most teachers have no idea how to teach strategy, because they haven't been taught strategy either. And
we're not taught how to teach it.
No.
In school.
And actually teaching strategy, is typically attempted at the MBA level. Mm. And even so, I would say that the vast majority of MBAs do not understand strategy. It also comes by experience and mentorship.
Right. That is for sure. And that's been mentioned a lot on the show, but just the mentorship piece is so valuable, whether it's one-on-one like this with someone, or reading books or listening to podcasts and advisors, but choosing strategically, who do you want to learn from and what pieces can you glean from each of those people?
May I offer you a piece of advice on how to do that?
Yes, of course.
Choose a mentor, an advisor, a coach whose history is your future.
Mm. Good advice.
If they ain't done it, they don't know how to do it.
Right.
And of course, that's one of the reasons why we have the challenges that we do. Why don't we have more people teaching strategy? Well, because the number of true strategists on this planet is in the 1-2% range. It is rarefied air.
Mm-hmm.
And so choose wisely, young one, grasshopper, as to who's going to teach you strategy. And I see this frequently where somebody will come and say, let me share with you our strategy. And there's no strategy in what they share. And I
And I
ask
bet
them,
it's step by step in order.
what they're doing is they're actually sharing tactics.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how we're going to get this done. Then they leave out the strategic components.
Mm-hmm.
And I ask them, define strategy for me. Well, it's the plan on getting where we're going to go. No, that's tactics. The strategy is, where are we going to go and why do we want to go there?
Mm-hmm. And then figure out the how as you work through the tactics.
That's exactly right. Great example of that is, America putting a man on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Never been done before. Barely got a person to orbit. And they did it within a decade.
Yeah.
They figured it out. But they had to start with a strategy. Let's do something that is really, really hard and has never, ever been done before and is going to cost us a heck of a lot of money. Now, of course, what a lot of people don't realize is what JFK was actually doing was funding the research for intercontinental ballistic missiles and calling it putting a man on the moon. Because the problem set's the same.
Mm-hmm. But it was the strategy of what are we going to do, and then backing up to figure out
how do we sell this to Americans?
Mm-hmm.
Because Americans aren't going to buy. We're gonna figure out how to build strategic missiles. They're not going to buy that,
right?
But they just might buy the romantic vision of putting a person on the moon.
The crazy, impossible, it can't be done kind of thing.
That's right. So,
yeah.
The reality is that they were those initiatives were one and the same. It's just that we had two different outcomes.
Right. Sometimes it's the positioning of it.
It is the positioning of it. And that gets back to the motivation for those who are going to be involved.
Mm-hmm. Back to the transformation.
That's exactly right. What do these people want to have that's different? And for the military, they wanted to have the might that would cause the other side not to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They wanted to be big and bad enough that the other side wouldn't risk doing anything. And the other side was, I want to do something romantic. I want to do something big. I want to do something I'm proud of my country about. So there are different motivations, two different audiences, two different motivations, same fundamental technology, same fundamental service.
But a very strategic positioning in a way to use it.
In both sides.
That's a great example. And that's a great way to bring it back to the idea of that transformational economy and how can we appeal to that within our organization and then externally in how we relate to other people and invite them.
Indeed. Invite them to come on the journey with us.
Right.
Let us be your tour guide.
Yeah. Appeal to that story and that need for deeper meaning with it.
That's exactly right. And that is going to create a whole new outcome. It's going to create a whole new conversation around grant writing. I hope that you're going to have some fun turning what we've talked about here into a grant description.
Yeah, and I hope it sparks some ideas in our listeners of just some creative thinking and how could they approach some problems differently, or just sometimes we hit a wall and we just need to step back and look at it a little differently.
Well, if you hit a wall, call me. That's why people call me.
You're the guy.
I can provide perspective. I'm the guy that gets people unstuck by offering them some fresh perspectives.
Yeah.
Because I'm not afraid to look into the future.
Right. And to speak bluntly about, hey, you need to get out of your own way in this piece, or shift over here and look at this differently. Yeah.
How long do you want your current situation to continue?
Right.
Okay. Because if it's forever, I can't help you. But if it's, I'd
keep
really
doing
like
what you're doing.
if it's, I'd like to walk out of here with new hope. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah, let's map it out.
one thing I want to point out is while these two new books have been written with corporations in mind, large corporations specifically, those with more than 100 people, they still are a roadmap and a blueprint for small organizations, because every one of the functions in the Nimble C-suite has to be accomplished. You have to have somebody who looks after the money. You have to look at somebody who looks after the sales or the donations and the marketing. You have to look after somebody that runs the operations and delivers the services that you have offered to your constituents. And somebody who looks after what is it that who we are at a high level, the B component of that. Every one of those elements are there, and we describe in exquisite detail what's required from a mindset and from a skill set, from a habit set, from a tool set to accomplish those roles. So it's a blueprint to help you do better today with a vision of how you might grow into something tomorrow. I mean, what organization wouldn't want to be so successful that they need a C-suite?
Right.
And become a United Way or become an American Heart Association or Red Cross. Who wouldn't want to do that? Because I guarantee you every one of those are operated with a C-suite.
And dare to think that big. Why not?
Indeed.
Yeah. No, from what I've read, it absolutely would apply to different sizes and even the small nonprofits, because we all need to understand a solid, healthy structure and to be aware of those blind spots as we grow and shift. And so it is valuable to think about it while you're small so that you can grow in a healthier way and understand that vision.
Yeah, you're going to avoid the stupid tax.
Let's hope so. Well, yeah, as much as possible.
And I think a really good example of that is typically within nonprofits, we promote people or put people into organizational slots because they're enthusiastic or they're loyal. And we blow the organization up because they don't have the skills.
Right. And put good people in the wrong seats.
Oh, big problem.
Yeah.
And everybody's miserable, including that person.
Right.
Versus with the Nimble C-suite, you can get an idea of what's the temperament, what's the worldview, what are the skill sets that they need to be successful there, so that you put the right person in the right place. And they operate out of their zone of genius continuously. And as one of my friends said, if you promote people who are enthusiastic idiots, they will enthusiastically screw up the company.
Right. That's true. Unfortunate, but true.
So good.
Yeah. Well, you have written plenty of your own books, obviously, and have your own programs, but what's a resource in particular that's been meaningful to you in your journey?
Oh my gosh, the answer to that question is absolutely simple. It's Robert Cialdini's Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion, probably the most important book I have read in terms of business.
Okay.
And the reason why is because if we're going to be successful in grant writing, if we're going to be successful in running an organization, if we're going to be successful in getting our services into the right people's hands, we have to have influence. We have to have persuasion. And Cialdini's book, in extraordinary ways, lays out the 6 key elements of how we can do that. And so, geez, why aren't you talking about one of your books, Mark? Well, the reason why is Cialdini is just inculcated in my body. It's inculcated in all my work. I use Cialdini unconsciously because I have been working with his work for, 20, 30 years. So, go get it. Go get the Audible, whatever you need to do, master those 6 principles of influence. And if we took the time and I shared them with you, you would see that I've used all 6 in our conversation today.
Okay. Now I'm curious. I'll have to listen back and look at them. Very good.
But they become invisible.
Mm-hmm. It becomes natural to you.
That's exactly right. It becomes, and it works. Mm-hmm. If the listener has stayed with us this long, it's worked.
Okay. Good to know. And now you've got us curious enough. We're probably all going to go out and buy the book and read it.
Well, I hope so. Or borrow it from the library. Get the Kindle edition, whatever.
Right.
The book is a fun read. It will blow your mind.
Okay. Good to know. I'm always on the lookout for a good book. And so speaking of, tell us, where can people connect to learn more about you? And tell us again the names of your books, which if someone's watching us on YouTube, of course they can see them. But if they're listening on the show, tell us all the details.
Well, quite frankly, I think for most nonprofits, the Nimble C-Suite would be the most valuable book for executives. Other books are much more tactical. As far as, I've written books on telesales and trade shows and negotiating and technology, how to sell technology, those kind of things. So they're less germane in terms of what a nonprofit exec would want to accomplish. So I think that probably the Nimble C-Suite is going to be the most valuable one out of the box. Perhaps the Nimble Company, if they need to be more tactical. C-Suite is more strategic and Nimble Company is more tactical.
And it's probably good to read them in that order, correct? That's the order I'm reading them, just because that's how you've presented them usually online.
Yeah, I would recommend that to a top officer.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that would be what I suggest that you do. And if I've said something here that sparked you and said, gee, Mark, I've got a blood spurting problem and, you might be able to help me, call me. Mm-hmm. My phone number is 719-440-0439. So 719-440-0439. It would ring this cell phone. Okay. And now you might be thinking, Mark, are you absolutely insane handing your phone out and say, call me? Well, you know who calls me? People who need me.
Okay, then. Yeah. And that's a generous offer because I know you will. I mean, I've talked with you before and I know that you're happy to pour into people and listen and shoot straight and just help people untangle what they're stuck with.
And the reality is I'll give you 20 minutes of my time and see what we can do. And, if you think you're going to be that valuable, let's go out and find one of your donors who's willing to pay for my services.
Mm-hmm. There we go.
It's a pretty simple thing to do is we'll figure out how to pay for me if that's what's required. Otherwise, connect with me on LinkedIn. Yep. That's a great way to stay in contact. And I think it's probably the most relevant thing right now is to do that. And Mark's on LinkedIn.com or search Mark S.A. Smith on LinkedIn and you'll find me. If you don't use the S.A., you'll never find me.
Too many Mark Smiths out there.
Yeah, it's a popular name.
Yeah, good name, but everybody took it.
That's right. Two one-syllable phrases. Mark Smith.
Yep. No, that's great. Well, and I will link to everything in the show notes, of course, and to the books we've talked about and your website as well and your LinkedIn profile so people can easily connect and find you. But I appreciate your time and sharing the wisdom. And I think we've gone just about as long as you said. So, but very worthwhile. And I hope this inspires people to look at things differently and think differently about their nonprofit, their organization, and how they can bring some creativity and innovation to their work.
Yep. And if you've listened to this and you've said, yeah, but that's the first thing you got to work on.
Yeah. Call it like it is.
That's it. Thank you. It's been a delight to be here. Thank you for inviting me on your show.
Thank you. It's been an honor. Okay, what'd you think of this conversation? I know it went a little long, but I also know he had so much valuable stuff to say, and I really hope it challenged you to at least think about your work a little bit differently, whether you are an individual grant writer or you are in the trenches of a nonprofit specifically. How can this challenge you to have that balance like he was talking about of the stability, but also that innovation and forward thinking? So I want to challenge you to sit with this idea and, like we talked about, give yourself time to be and think, not just do and go, but also step back and have that time to be and let the ideas build and stew and just brain dump in a notebook, whatever you need to do. Just let yourself get creative and explore maybe some new alternatives or ways of problem solving or ways of collaborating. So I would love to hear what this has sparked for you and how you will use it with your team if you're working with a nonprofit. Feel free to shoot me a message on LinkedIn or connect with me on my website and let me know what you're up to. Also, please share my TEDx talk, The Real ROI of Grant Writing, so that we can all help be a part of helping nonprofits and supporting them in the work that they're doing. So have a great week and go change your world.